Laska was of mixed lineage, a characteristic often overlooked when seen in stray canines. Usually skinny and unkempt, with terribly tangled fur, she had to resort to begging for sustenance under store verandas until irate storekeepers shooed her away. Soon Laska became pregnant, courted by an elegant-looking purebred dog. The dog's owner idly stood by, patiently awaiting the conclusion of their encounter. As his dog left satisfied, he simply returned to his path of the day. The pregnancy brought about a need for extra nourishment for Laska, compelling her to roam further in her hunger-fueled searches. But being pregnant complicated things further. Her towering belly induced fear among the locals, presenting an even bigger obstacle than her previous stray status. No longer was she even tolerated within proximity of shop frontages. The concern of her delivering her puppies to their doorsteps arose among the store owners. One day her path led her to a 24/7 shop, offering very minimal food options. It was mostly frequented by individuals seeking cigarettes or alcoholic beverages. Nonetheless, on rare occasions, patrons were known to purchase snacks, and occasionally they even shared with Laska. Exhausted, she decided to settle in front of this particular shop. Her whimpers echoed in the stillness as she attempted to find a comfortable position. The shopkeeper, however, had other plans. Abruptly, a saleswoman rushed out, shouting at Laska while brandishing her broom. Weakened and weary, Laska tucked her tail, dipped her head, and retreated. The rampant harassment from the shopkeeper chased Laska further away from the shop. The persistent saleswoman stalked her, loudly voicing profanities for all to hear. The bristles of her broom painfully slashed against Laska's protruding, rounded side, causing the distressed dog to yelp. The sudden commotion attracted the attention of others around. "Stop! Why are you doing this?" a man challenged. "Were you also assaulted during your pregnancies?" His comments turned the angle of confrontation in a completely different direction. The accused saleswoman became hostile towards the man, reciprocating with more yelling. Unexpectedly, the crowd showed support for the man, forcing the saleswoman to retreat. The perturbed crowd still expressed their indignation towards her, but their attention on Laska was nearly non-existent. Laska, now lying heavily on the road, was parched. The day was hot, and a nearby source of water was not in sight, causing her to repeatedly lick her dry nose. Among the chaos, the watchful eyes of a stranger were fixated on her. The stranger approached and, squatting by Laska, unveiled his water container. He gingerly poured water into his cupped hand and offered it to Laska, but she recoiled. Reassuringly, the man whispered, "Don't fear." Tentatively, Laska ventured closer, accepting the liquid sustenance. He continued to replenish his palm with water until Laska's thirst was quenched. He gently stroked the animal's ear, and Laska contentedly shut her eyes. "My place is tiny, but if you want, let's head that way." Assuring the dog, he stated, "I mean you no harm and will secure a home for your pups." The dog could not grasp his words, but his soothing pat and affectionate tone set in. Consequently, Laska rose and trailed after him, seemingly connected to him by an invisible leash. Her caregiver led her to his section of the dwelling, demarcated by a barrier. Although the space was limited, it was ample for a DIY doghouse. He constructed a wooden enclosure, cut out an entrance, and shielded the rooftop with a tarp to inhibit any seepage of rainwater. He also padded the bed with soft, outworn clothes. Laska was ecstatic. She acquired not just a home, but freedom as well. She was never cuffed and was let loose in the yard, and had a chance to venture outside every evening. The caregiver desired to adorn Laska with a collar, but noting her grimy coat, he held himself back. He filled an enormous tub with water and placed it in the center of the yard. Although skeptical initially, Laska eventually gave in and submerged herself in the tub. The man delicately bathed the dog, snipping off entangled patches of fur. Emerging from the bath, Laska's fur was revealed to be cream-colored rather than gray. Now the collar looked splendid on her. The dog thrived under the care of her doting custodian. Shortly, she delivered 4 pups. They bore a remarkable resemblance to their sire, suggesting that they could be considered pedigree. But the man disapproved of deception and was honest about the pups being crossbreeds when he gave them away. He didn't part with the puppies for profit, but to find them suitable homes. A couple of them were claimed on the first day to be taken into private households. Another one had been adopted to serve as a security dog at a newly inaugurated organization. But finding the fourth one a home took almost a week. Finally, the pup found a good home. Having done that, the man beckoned Laska to tag along. He never confined her, hence never resorted to using a leash. Laska followed her caregiver faithfully, ever obedient. She understood her caregiver's intentions, even without verbal instructions. After the departure of the first couple of puppies, Laska was subdued yet composed. But parting with the last pup was particularly sorrowful for her. She kept glancing back with every step they took and was extremely restless once they got back home. The owner believed that Laska, the dog, was simply struggling to adjust to a life lacking puppies, and soon enough, she would be at ease. So he decided to take Laska to the park for an evening walk ahead of the usual time. But the dog had other intentions in mind. Barely had she covered several meters along the habitual path when she paused momentarily, appearing to be attentive to an unheard sound, and bolted in a completely unanticipated direction. Her owner was left with no choice but to trail after her. He yelled and screamed her name, but it didn't deter Laska's focus, and soon after, she vanished from his sight. The distraught man combed through the surrounding area but found no trace of her. He returned home hoping she might be there, but it was fruitless. Concern started to creep over the owner. In the few months that Laska had been living with him, he had developed an emotional attachment to the caring and faithful dog. Such bizarre behavior left him perplexed. The following day, he made a missing pet poster and circulated it in the neighborhood, but his cell remained inactive. Countless days were spent in unsuccessful searches, leaving him in despair and hopelessness. Nonetheless, the city moved on, leaving no space for his loss. Evening amblers were seen taking in the nightlights near the city canals. Among these wanderers, a couple found themselves far off from the city center. As they continued their journey alongside one of the river's tributaries, a pitiful whining sound caught their attention. The man brought out his cell and used the flashlight to gain a better view. He saw a light figure moving close to the river. The city's river had been confined years ago, with towering concrete walls to prevent any erosion of the banks. Fancy barriers were fitted on top and periodically every decade replaced with innovative designs. In due course, the river began to dwindle. Only the spring deluge could provoke the calm stream to wreak havoc. During the rest of the year, tiny brooks were the only reminders of the once grand river. They had contributed to the formation of several small islands, brimming with dense vegetation and serving as a sanctuary for ducks. Just then, something was making its way across a vacant patch left by the receding water. It seemed like a dog from the light figure that was visible. The man was trying to gauge the height of the artificial ledge, which was anywhere between 3 and 4 meters. The animal couldn't extricate itself in such conditions. Jumping in to save the dog was equally futile, as he would be stranded without assistance. In this predicament, he contacted emergency services. While the operators did log in his request, they postponed the attempt to the following morning, claiming it to be ineffectual under the dark sky. The next morning, a crowd had gathered near the canal in anticipation. Provisions of ladders and ropes were made available by the rescue service staff. A crowd started to form, and the duo who had spotted the animal the previous day arrived as well. They pointed towards a small offshore landmass, but it was desolate. However, not taking any chances, the rescuers proceeded further. They found a vibrant canine wearing a collar near the viaduct. The spectators attempted to attract her with gestures, but she retreated. She favored one paw, indicating an injury to the rescuers, who believed they could retrieve her from the waterway. The dog was surprisingly spry, leading everyone towards the bridge. "Come on, Laska," resonated a call from the shoreline. Laska gracefully wagged her tail but continued her retreat. A passerby chanced upon the ongoing spectacle and decided to observe. He was taken aback to see his canine at the waterway's bottom, behaving unusually like luring the onlookers. The rescuers made a similar inference and ceased attempts to capture the canine, choosing instead to placidly follow her lead. Laska, thrilled by the crowd's discernment, directed them beneath the bridge. Under the shadowy recess of the minor islet lay a fuzzy bundle, a puppy dedicated to a diligent owner. The circumstances of its ordeal in the ditch were inexplicable, but the creature trembled and barely moved. Once the rescuers picked the pup, Laska willingly trailed behind them. She calmly agreed to a leash and awaited her retrieval. Laska's ecstatic master eagerly approached her. Laska undertook energetic tail wagging and hand licking, showcasing apologetic gestures for the concern caused. Not far behind emerged the rescuers with the puppy. The little one seemed frail. The master struggled to carry Laska and the puppy simultaneously, so the young pair, who had initially found the animals, lent a hand. The animals were transported to a veterinary facility. An X-ray inspection revealed that Laska had an undisclosed crack in her limb. The vet iterated that such incidents were frequent with falls from significant heights. Laska's broken bone was rectified and supported with a cast. The pup, however, was in a bleaker condition. It seemed like an intentional purge off the viaduct into the water body, which directly resulted in the survival of the puppy. He would have perished had he fallen on solid ground instead of water. The puppy had suffered a fracture on his ribs, 2 of his legs, and a head trauma. Despite Laska's relentless efforts, the pup was cold, famished, and feeble. The young pair, who had discovered the animals, came forward offering to foster the puppy. "We were considering adopting a dog," the couple revealed. "Initially, we were searching for a breeder, but this little furball needs aid much more promptly." Laska observantly smelled the couple and licked their fingers while wagging her tail joyfully. It was perceived as an affirmative reaction by the owner. This little puppy found a new place to call home, leaving Laska back in her kennel, but this time she seemed tranquil and made no attempts to flee. Once Laska's leg cast was taken off, her owner guided her to reunite with her little one. The fur parents shared their particulars for being in touch and cheerfully met the mother and her pup. By then, the little one's broken bones had also recuperated. The puppy had grown healthier and appeared strikingly similar to his sire. Observers misconstrued him as a thoroughbred. Hence, the couple almost obtained something they originally intended. Laska was thrilled to reunite with her little one. She bounced in joy and thankfully licked her caretaker's hands the entire way home. However, during a park visit, a male dog tried to approach her forcefully once again. The owner shooed away the audacious creature, ending up in a tiff with his caretaker, following a quick trip to the veterinarian. Laska had a surgical procedure, post which Laska no longer confronted issues from other dogs. She continued her leash-free walks and attentively responded to every signal her owner made. The dog was always properly fed and meticulously cared for, residing in a kennel with the privilege of moving into the house during chilly days. Laska felt like the world's most fortunate dog. Vasily put on his running shoes and turned toward the forest on the outskirts of town. The cleaner air made his runs more satisfying than anywhere else. His route traversed an abandoned construction site leading to a scarcely identifiable trail along the city forest. As Vasily treads on the concrete blocks, he spots something large and white dart out of his peripheral vision, which disappears as soon as he turns. Intrigued, Vasily traipsed behind the pile of concrete slabs, curiously scanning around. Suddenly, he heard a rustling noise from the bushes. A large white dog emerged, making a quick exit upon sight of Vasily. Catching a quick glimpse, Vasily noticed a suspicious object attached to one of the dog's rear legs. It compelled him to follow the dog. He aimed to free the dog from what seemed to be a rusty trap latched onto his leg, but he was taken aback by the terrifying sight he observed once he was closer. A rusty-hued, sharp trap was indeed hanging onto the dog's paw. It was surrounded by a maroon-tinted fur patch. Although the canine made occasional efforts at licking the wound, merely licking would not have healed it. Wisely favoring his 3 viable legs, the wounded creature hobbled on. The canine retreated from the human, darting into the encompassing forest, only to re-emerge in the construction zone once the man had departed. Rather than carry on with his jog, the man sought help from an animal rescue agency, returning to the site later with a vet in tow. The dog was still present, but scampered under a concrete slab when it encountered the humans. Vasya and the vet endeavored to coax the animal out, They shouted, whistled, and slapped their thighs invitingly, to no avail. The hesitant tail wagger would not venture near. As Telly drew nearer, the frightened dog made a sharp about-face, disappearing into the woodland. It became apparent that the men could not retrieve the pet unaided. Dogs in heightened states of anxiety can turn aggressive and pose a threat to humans. Thus, they opted against chasing the terrified creature. Instead, they convened back in town, rallying a small crew of willing volunteers and veterinary professionals. Procuring a sizable bowl and copious amounts of dog food, they hoped to bait the fearful dog. They also secured a large crate, softly lined with a blanket. The challenge was to figure out a safe way to capture the petrified pup. A method using sections of mesh to form temporal barriers was proposed. Consequently, multiple vehicles bearing supplies and manpower arrived at the construction site. The dog was as before, hovering near the concrete blocks. But the sight of the crowd sent it scurrying to the closest bushes for cover, from where it observed the group's activities with a mixture of trepidation and curiosity. Volunteers initially constructed a mesh enclosure near one of the concrete blocks. They then placed the bowl within the enclosure, filling it with kibbles. They even added a can of wet food atop the dry, hoping the potent aroma would catch the dog's attention. With the trap set, the people retreated to their vehicles as one volunteer kept watch, hidden behind the concrete structures. Everyone anxiously awaited, hoping the tantalizing scent would tempt their four-legged friend. The dog was wary at first, poking its snout from the bushes and taking in hearty sniffs of the food. However, the lingering scent of the humans still made it exceedingly cautious. The call of hunger eventually won out. The canine cautiously approached the concrete slab, making a beeline for the food bowl through the concrete tunnel and immediately digging into the meal. As the dog was engrossed in its feast, the entrance to the slab got swiftly blocked with the mesh. While the dog was now trapped, it seemed reluctant to leave its concrete haven and enter the specially prepared enclosure. Slowly but surely, the volunteers drew nearer, giving time for the dog to acclimate to their presence. Much time elapsed, yet there was no sign of the dog emerging. Next, Vasily got hold of a blanket and firmly climbed beneath the slab on the opposite side of the pen. He positioned the folded blanket before him as a shield in case the animal charged at him. However, the scared canine exhibited the opposite reaction, withdrawing further from the approaching blanket. Successfully, Vasily was able to cover the dog's muzzle. More volunteers quickly convened on the scene. The team gently maneuvered the animal onto its side, held it firm by the attacker, and securely closed its jaws. Immediately, the veterinarian swiftly wrapped the dog's muzzle with a bandage to safeguard everyone from bites. The team then covered the animal's head with a blanket, eliminating any visual stimuli. This action caused the dog to stop struggling abruptly, lay still, and respirate heavily. The team then scrutinized the animal trap. It was readily apparent that the trap had been forgotten in the forest for some time, as evidenced by the rusted metal. It was likely that the hunter who placed it there had overlooked the trap. With significant effort, Vasily managed to pry open the restrictive trap. Immediately, the veterinarian treated the animal's foot, smothering it with iodine. The wound was a horrific sight. The dog's continual licking of their wound hindered the healing process. However, the animal's self-cleansing act also prevented the wound from becoming infected. The veterinarian, though, was worried that only saving the foot wouldn't be adequate. They presented an open carrier before the dog's snout. Given its freedom, the canine willingly entered the carrier on its own, and the door was swiftly shut. The team placed the carrier securely in the veterinarian's vehicle, and he rushed off to the clinic. Concurrently, as the other volunteers were constructing a fence and packing a bowl, Vasily meticulously inspected the trap. It was a simple design. Once an animal's paw triggered the spring located in the trap's center, the jaws would abruptly lock shut, gripping the paw and fracturing the bones. On the sides of the trap were loops with remaining fragments of rope. It seemed that the trap had been tied to a tree trunk and concealed with fallen leaves. The unsuspecting animal was caught in the trap as it approached the trunk too closely. Its paw immediately got stuck, and the canine was left to endure agonizing pain for several days. Though the animal yearned for relief from this nightmarish experience, the rope held it steadfastly close to the tree trunk. The dog was forced to chew through the ropes to reclaim its freedom of movement. Nonetheless, eliminating the ropes didn't offer any release from the trap. Consequently, the tormented animal had to suffer unbearable pain for many days, stuck and unable to free itself from the constraining trap. The dog did not request aid from humans, perhaps due to past trauma or the fear of human scent on the trap that other two-legged creatures might cause it harm. Undeterred, Vasily took the trap with him. Alongside 2 additional volunteers, he headed to the police station to report the terrible occurrence. Identifying the guilty party was nearly impossible, but remaining silent was not an option. The trap had been set not too far from the city. The location was one frequented by mushroom gatherers, dog walkers, and teenagers who enjoyed outdoor meals accompanied by acoustic melodies on their guitars. At any moment, anyone could have accidentally stumbled upon the trap. The officers were upfront about the slim chances of identifying those responsible. However, the volunteers chose to take their chances. They went around the city to hunting stores and local markets, armed with a photo of the trap. They asked for advice on where they could find such a trap, but the sellers were unanimous in their response that it was illegal, and they had nothing of the sort. Regrettably, the leads soon faded. Their only consolation was the hope that no other traps lingered in the forest to ensnare unsuspecting victims. In the meantime, the dog was transported to a clinic. Be it due to the removal of the constant pressure from the trap, the dog noticeably perked up and there was no necessity for sedatives. The little creature was quiet and compliant during all procedures. The inconveniences kept piling up, however. An X-ray of the paw revealed a bone fracture. Not knowing the specific timeline of the injury made the prognosis uncertain. The doctor prepared a range of tests, blood and tissue samples, and thorough examinations. Meanwhile, they discovered fleas, ticks, malnourishment, and stomach issues. Deep, infected scratches gouged the dog's face, possibly from attempting to navigate through dense undergrowth. As they addressed these issues, the test results came through. Heartbreakingly, the paw had been ensnared for an extended period. This led to necrosis in the tissues, with cells dying en masse, releasing toxins that threatened the whole body. The only chance of saving the dog's life was a timely amputation of the limb. The news was grave, but the doctors seized the only opportunity to save the dog's life. They put the dog under a mild sedative. The dog drifted off quickly, and they prepared it for the operation. What followed was a grueling 3-hour surgery. The dog was still quite frail, but any delay could have had dire consequences. So, they did what was vital. Despite the odds, they pushed on. The medical professional had no alternatives left. After enduring long hours, they finally managed to treat the lacerations and seal them tight by applying medical-grade adhesive covers. A precautionary neck guard was secured to the canine to deter self-induced damage to the stitched wounds. The patient's vital signs were all within the normal range, resulting in its transference to solitary living quarters. As comprehension slowly retraced its steps, everything appeared to be swirling and blending. The scents, the noises, the terror in the canine was palpable, yet its physical power to retaliate was non-existent. The dog's journey back to self-awareness was an extended process. Upon regaining mobility, it noticed the unusual enclosure around its neck. The restrictive collar clouded its perception and debilitated movement, causing the dog great annoyance. The canine fiercely shook its head, only intensifying the whirling confusion. Attempts to dislodge the collar with its forelimbs were futile as the collar was clasped tight around its neck. The dog resorted to its last plan of action. Raising its rear leg to forcibly scrape off the obtrusive object around its neck, it suddenly came to a standstill. The leg was gone. In a frenzy, the canine contorted and even flipped onto its back, but there was no sign of its limb anywhere. It was then that the veterinarian stepped in, eliminating the collar to further inspect the patient. The dog saw its injured limb, previously ensnared by a metallic trap's powerful jaws for a significant stretch, was now merely a protective plaster. The magnitude of its predicament was truly fathomed by the dog when the medicinal analgesics wore off. An agonized whimper escaped the canine as it tried to alleviate its suffering, but its overbearing collar prohibited any wound contact. The following days morphed into an absolute dread for the furry creature. Despite this, The pain slowly began to subside. The healing process was well underway. The intervention by the vet was timely. They successfully restrained the spread of necrosis throughout the body. The canine regained its appetite and was back on its feet. Noticing this, the veterinarian decided to take the dog for outdoor strolls and was taken aback by its adaptive mobility. The canine exhibited an impressive rapid adaptation to ambulating on a trifecta limb system while the cumbersome trap was still attached to its paw. The absence of the unwieldy device, which previously risked entanglement in shrubs, was a relief indeed. The creature was beginning to feel at ease, albeit with a minor alteration of gravitational balance from its accustomed posture. A visitor, Vasily, who was instrumental in the dog's rescue, was introduced to a jovial and robust creature. The rescued canine instantly recognized him and, in a burst of ecstasy, darted towards Vasily, tail wagging ardently. The dedicated veterinarian's care had had a profound impact, and the dog showcased reduced apprehension around humans. While it exhibited cautious vigilance around unfamiliar faces, it no longer sought flight or concealment. The animal doctor informed a man named Vasily about a crucial operation and also expressed his wish for the beast to eventually find a home. Suddenly, a canine injured in a car accident was rushed into the clinic. The pet doctor handed Vasily the dog's leash quickly and then hastened to the surgery room. Meanwhile, Vasily, instead of passing on the creature to the medical assistants, decided to take it on a casual stroll across the clinic. The dog turned out to be exceedingly cooperative. Despite not being acquainted with obedience commands, it exhibited keen attention to vocal tones and intently gazed into Vasily's eyes. When it finally came time to relinquish custody of the animal and let it be taken away, the man was unable to do so. The dog journeyed to its new residence in Vasily's car, ready to reacquaint with and grow fond of humans. No, we aren't departing from here until he accomplishes at least the simplest chores. If we don't insist on this, it will be impossible to get anything from him later. Personal qualities and abilities need to be honed from a very tender age. Do you know the way my dad taught me how to swim? He merely tossed me into deep water, and that was it. I had to manage on my own. Look here, Sam, you weakling. You will be making that jump today, I guarantee it. And he began pulling the terrified creature with a sturdy fabric leash. Sam whimpered and moved back on a slim wooden board, then lost his footing and plunged. Good job, you accomplished something, but that doesn't count. Let's do it all over again. And then he hoisted the dog and flung it on a tall platform, pushing it to leap. This fellow is such an uncouth person, an elderly man observed from a park bench, witnessing the dreadful scene. Bear in mind, young lady, you cannot manage children, grown-ups, or especially animals in this manner. Dogs execute orders well, not out of trepidation, but because they find joy in it. If he takes pleasure in it, and if he is given adequate incentive, like a fragment of sausage as a reward, then he would willingly carry out these jumps without any complications. Furthermore, you mustn't rush an unskilled dog to leap higher than its height. Start with a standard stick. Let it fetch it for you, then instruct elementary commands. If that doesn't work, surrender him to the specialists. The corpulent man appeared to be voicing his protests into the void. But in reality, a young spouse was seated beside him on the bench, pushing a baby stroller. She seemed deeply engrossed in her thoughts and exhibited little interest in her surroundings. Nevertheless, the old man carried on. Trust me, I know what I'm saying. I've had plenty of dogs in my time, mostly mixed breeds, but they were all intelligent creatures. You need to comprehend the behavior of dogs. Now, with the passing of Nida, I only have one left. What if I get another one and my time runs out before then? The elderly man concluded his soliloquy as the sport-clad individual, disheartened, quietly left the square. He was dragging the shivering puppy, nearly forcibly, on a tether. The puppy wasn't fearing heights anymore. It was fearing the anger of its guardian, a tense individual who didn't see the point, or purposefully didn't want to comprehend, of proper practices. Oksana spotted him in her courtyard repeatedly and had prior familiarity with him since their adolescence. They grew up together in the same neighborhood with a considerable age difference, so their paths hardly intersected. Yet she always knew his behavior could be off-putting. He was consistently loud, nearly yelling, and could be highly dismissive and ill-mannered to others for any given reason. He had recently acquired a canine companion, not to provide it with affection and care, and receive reciprocal feelings, but for another motive. Perhaps he fantasized he could train an exceedingly intelligent dog to execute stunts at a mere hand motion or look from him. He failed to grasp the tedious progression and extensive journey to mutual comprehension and training a puppy involves. After some duration, Oksana found herself observing the same man endeavoring to teach his canine some etiquette. This time around, he had a bicycle in one hand and a leash in the other. Mounting the bicycle, he attached the tether to the back cargo holder and zoomed off, forcing the tiny Sam to chase the bicycle, maneuvering amidst loud vehicles emitting a piercing odor of exhaust. Oksana spent extensive periods on the spacious, glazed balcony of the ground floor, fundamentally an extension of the room, akin to a veranda in a private house in the summertime. A jobless, unmarried mother had just completed her education and secured employment when life took an unsettling turn. Her life at a mere 25 years wasn't nearing its end, her parents emphasized. She had to regain composure, take a pause, and devote attention to her infant. Her parents were insistent that she leave her employment and, under no circumstances, take any rash action but raise her baby. It was unfathomable for Oksana that she would end up as the victim of such a typical predicament, where the man disappears upon finding out she is pregnant. Half a year had passed since the birth of her healthy son, and although things seemed standard, with a roof over her head and parental assistance, she couldn't rid herself of an internal sense of anxiety and disturbance. Around 60 minutes later, a bubbly neighbor lithely maneuvered his bike into their garden. The dog was still strapped to the bike's cargo area, thus he had tired him out for a straight hour, she mused to herself. The poor pup seemed set to keel over, possibly parched, his tongue hanging out. "Excellent job, Sam. We've exerted a lot of effort and gotten tired, right? All right, time to head back home. And in the twilight, back to our training area. We're going to work on leaping over barriers today." And once again, the guy pulled the weary dog along. "With your temperament and demeanor, you are capable of becoming an amazing mom," she thought, observing the situation. She voiced this thought out loud, just as a child's wail reverberated from the dwelling, signaling her son had woken up. She frequently noticed them from her terrace. She was able to track Sam's growth, although her knowledge of him was rather indirect. With time, the dog developed a phobia of the outdoors. The man forcefully hauled Sam out of the entrance, and the dog resisted with all his might. He refused to cross the threshold. He was frightened by bicyclists, passers-by, traffic noise, and any sharp, sudden sounds. Sam would retract his paws, slump heavily on his hindquarters, and then struggle against the leash with all his strength. His demeanor greatly vexed his master, who envisioned having a courageous, astute companion. "Stick close," the harsh owner bellowed, filling the courtyard with his voice while liberally smacking Sam with the leash. "You're responsible for this dog," his wife yelled back. "If he's too much for you, give him away. You don't have any idea. He's always been unintelligent and untrainable since his infancy. Regardless, I won't give up easily." He persisted in teaching the dog obedience daily, with the only emotion he could convey being fear. Suddenly, they were out of sight, and Oksana ceased to see this odd couple in her yard. By this time, her son, Caustic, was learning to walk and kept her busy. She had to ensure he didn't trip while running, staying near him constantly. One day, she looked at the house across the street and saw a forlorn Sam by the entrance. He was sprawled right by it, unclean and with brambles knotted in his fur. His overall look suggested he had been living outdoors for an extended period. Oksana placed the child in the stroller and walked up to the dog. He had finally found his new home. Beside him stood the familiar old man, who enjoyed sharing his tales with the residents. The young couple had already packed up and left their old home about a month ago. Their dog, it appeared, either got misplaced or was left behind. But an intriguing fact was that, no matter how undesired the canine may have felt, he continued to return to his former home. He needed somebody, so it appeared it was time to give him some food. Oksana began discreetly caring for this humble creature, careful not to arouse her folks' attention. The canine consistently sat near the entrance of the previous flat and denied entry. His presence was not appreciated by the nearby residents. There was a gentle and grateful demeanor to this animal, and his eyes held thoughtful depths. He was almost developing into a full-grown shepherd. It was during an abrupt freezing spell in the middle of November that Oksana, tossing and turning one night in worry for the dog, decided to take him in. With an overwhelming sense of concern, she wrapped in a coat and left the warmth of her house. "Hey, Sam," she coaxed gently. "Don't stay here alone. Nobody's going to come back for you. Come with me." At her words, Sam slowly stood up, wagging his tail. He seemed to comprehend her intentions. "Not so daft, are you? Just follow me quietly," she whispered to the dog as she entered her flat, making sure he didn't make a sound. "Slip on through and quickly come to my room. We will have a long talk in the morning, so you need to be good," she said. After leading him inside, she provided food for him in a metal bowl and then shut the kitchen door behind her. The next morning, her father, extending his hand to the dog, inquired, "So is your name Sam or Samuel?" He continued with a light-hearted shrug. "What does it matter? Let him remain. What are we going to do? Put him out in the cold? Give me your paw." To their surprise, Sam timidly extended his right paw to the elderly man and gained more trust in his new surroundings. For a considerable duration, his phobia of the streets persisted, but Oksana and her parents never pressed him or urged him. If he doesn't want to leave, permit him to stay. He can step outside only when necessary, was Oksana's dad's attitude. If Sam showed reluctance to go for a walk, they would willingly leave a newspaper in the house for him. Gradually, his anxiety started to lessen with time. Sam stabilized himself and started to walk calmly alongside his human without yanking at the leash. He realized that good behavior always led to delicious treats. The leash was now more of a formality, with Sam being tranquil and disciplined. Sometimes he would gaze longingly towards his former home, whimpering a little at the entrance where he had spent numerous months. But these instances grew fewer with time, and eventually Sam was fully immersed in his newfound family. Oksana's small child adored Sam from the get-go, and the dog allowed the child to engage in any playful mischief with him. He didn't require formal training, as he was content with his new family. Oksana was always apprehensive about it, recalling the harsh treatment he had suffered from his prior caretaker. Despite the investigation, the specific details of his past remain a mystery. Often the old gentleman who lived nearby would spot the trio, the young woman, the child, and the dog, and he would come over to impart encouraging words. I felt this coming. They were simply not a good fit. What this abandoned canine needed was a household filled with love and kindness. Then he would reciprocate in leaps and bounds. Here, I've kept these for you. They are chicken bones, just the cartilage. Canines should never have tubular ones. And his observations proved correct. Sam, it was clear, was blessed with an extraordinary level of intelligence and quick thinking. Once, when the child was about to unknowingly dash towards the road while chasing after a soccer ball, Sam, without any hesitation, leaped down from a 3-meter-high patio and stood between the child and the incoming traffic. That was when Oksana was still in the process of handling 2 bulky grocery bags. She watched in horror as Sam pushed her child aside just in time, seconds before a speeding truck, blaring its horn, zoomed by them. Dropping everything, she sprinted towards them, pulling both her child and Sam into her arms, tears freely flowing down her cheeks. I believe these belong to you, she managed to utter, gazing up at a tall gentleman who was holding out the soccer ball toward her. He couldn't help but comment, how did you manage to train your dog to react like that? I witnessed how she leapt from such a height toward the child. Swiftly, she replied, oh, he has always been this intuitive. Nothing was physically taught. He just comprehends it all. I, myself, have always yearned for a pet with this level of intelligence, but I wondered if I would be able to cope, the tall man said, extending his hand forward for a handshake. I'm Kostya. I thought it would be a good time to introduce myself. Her response was swift. Oksana, and thank you for the soccer ball. The little one here, his name is Kostik too. Motioning towards the dog, she continued. And this is our Samuel, also known as Sam. Good to meet all of you. I live close by, so I could assist you with the grocery bags. Together, the four of them strolled down the narrow pathway that led to their home. On the way, Sam wagged his tail energetically, as this smart canine realized that this was the dawn of a new beginning.